short answer is yes. The Global Reporting Initiative, as you know, has been around for 22 years now. And over those many years, we have gotten the largest adoption rate of any international standard for environmental, social, and governance disclosure. But in those 20 years, in comes the SDGs. The SDGs came along in 2015, so you have 20 years of reporting and only about 3 or 4 years of the SDGs. So it's very confusing to a lot of companies, like how do I overlay the SDGs on what I'm used to doing with GRI? And so working with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, we came up with a document called the Compass. And the Compass helps companies translate what they're doing today into the SDGs. And we know that companies now are sometimes even larger than countries when it comes to their contribution. So we absolutely need to have companies involved in this. And the Compass is a great way for them to do that. Yeah, in my position as the global standard setter, I don't often like to single out companies. But I think if you look at the overall adoption of the GRI standards, what you see is many of the largest brands in the world have adopted GRI standards. So right now the statistics are amazing because this is very new. KPMG tells us that 93% of the largest companies on the planet by revenue are reporting sustainability results. 75% of those companies are using GRI standards. So again, companies can be larger than countries. I worked for one company that was the world's first $1 trillion in capital appreciation company, Apple. Many of these companies are using GRI. Yeah, so I'm very new to Colombia. This is my first visit here, so I feel a little bit not qualified to answer your question.
Okay.
But I have seen some things work in other areas that I see possibly working here as well. I think, first of all, as you mentioned in the question, having civil society, government, academia, and industry work together, multi-stakeholder processes, work very, very well. Secondly, I think that regulation actually is quite important. In other countries that GRI is very active in, we see the stock market regulator having a rule so that all listed companies need to disclose this information. Is it just to make the world better? Well, that's certainly an important value. But it's also about protecting shareholders. This information is important for the outcomes of companies, not just in how they impact the world, but how they return value to their shareholders. Yeah, so I think our work with WBCSD, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, has been incredibly valuable. But we know that mapping is just the beginning of the exercise. Many companies right now, if they even understand the SDGs, that's where they are. They're mapping. This is what we do and how it relates to the SDGs. But we need to go further. So GRI, in working with the UN Global Compact, has developed 2 additional documents. One is the analysis. So it lists for each SDG and all 169 targets, actions, additional actions that a company can take to improve that target. And then also the disclosure standards they can use, not just GRI but others, to report on those actions. That's document number 2. The document number 3 is the practical guide. And that helps companies from the very beginning, the prioritization, and then incorporating this into their management systems, taking actions, and then reporting. So the whole cycle is laid out in the practical guide. So those 2 additional documents, I think, are very useful for companies. So small and medium enterprises, the SMEs as we call them, are really the backbone of the economy. We know that about 90% of economic activity and most employment is with SMEs, small and medium companies. Yet our adoption rate in terms of sustainability reporting and GRI is very low with small and medium enterprises. They find it complex, they find it burdensome, and they frankly don't know why they're doing it. And I think the answer in the competitive business program supported by SECO, the Swiss government, has been because it matters to your business. Because your buyers really care about this, because you can have better relationship with current buyers and you can find new business through being a sustainable company. Why is that? Having been in private sector for 20 years, I can tell you that companies that do well on sustainability are frankly better managed companies. They're better partners. And I think it's a virtuous cycle. And so as we have been in the competitive business program now for a few years, we are starting to see that. We have a target of 500 SMEs in the program. We're going to exceed that target. So it's very exciting. Let's face it, in the world that we live in now of social media, of fake news, of anybody can get any information, it is very difficult for a journalist to dig deep into this topic. I mean, in all honesty, I have trouble explaining to my relatives what I do for a living. And they're like, what? So when you have very limited time and a lot of different media available, it's a very big problem for media. So we are creating a fund to help these journalists to understand these issues and then be better able to report on it. But I also want to make this point very clear. It's one thing to report on the successes that companies have had in sustainability, and there are many of them. But a journalist's responsibility is also to report on companies who aren't doing so well, and what can they do better. And in my many, many years in the private sector, I can say that those stories that expose companies that need to do better, those can be the biggest impact stories that we have. And I think it's also the journalist's responsibility to uncover those stories. First of all, that's a fantastic idea. I mean, let's face it, when we go home or we're looking at our phones, we're all looking at information that is through emojis or other ways of communicating, and that's just the world we live in. And then you come to the GRI standards or what WBCSD does or the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's very difficult to understand. It takes a lot of knowledge. So I think it's fantastic what you're doing. In terms of what GRI could do to make it more simple, we are working through the competitive business program, and we're doing all sorts of things from not just training, but gamification, to make it fun, to make people understand these issues, on a level that they can encounter it without being an expert. So it is something that is definitely on our agenda. Well, we just talked about one of them, which is basic understanding and awareness, right? And we have many ways to approach that. But I also think that there's more than that. As you dig into these topics, each one is very deep in terms of the expertise that's required. Safety is an entire field where people can spend their whole careers learning about safety. But you not only have to report on safety, you need to have water, you need to have climate change, then you need to look at ethics and diversity and so on. And it can get incredibly detailed. So I think what we need to do is discuss the role of a report preparer, because that person goes across all of these issues. And having been involved in over 20 sustainability reports for 3 different companies, I can tell you it's a difficult job. So I actually wrote a book about this that helps these people understand when you're going to all of these different issues, what do you need to know? How do you need to understand this information, make sure it's credible, and then present it in a way that's understandable and usable. So few people know this, but actually GRI was a co-founder of the Integrated Reporting movement. We still sit on the Integrated Reporting Council, and I'm quite involved with them. So we think that companies that report information on sustainability within their annual report is a good thing. We don't think that there's only one way to do it. Many companies have their own way for their own reasons to report on sustainability, which is fine. But we do support the notion of integration of environmental, social, and governance information in financial information. But it goes beyond that. It's reporting is just the outcome. It goes to integrated thinking. So having the board, having the C-suite, having the management of the company understand these issues so they're managing them that makes sense for their business, that's the key.